It is 42 past the hour. Beautiful shot of the White House this morning in Washington, D.C. The opposition leader of the country of Georgia was arrested yesterday. Police stormed the headquarters of the United National Movement using tear gas and batons and arrested its leader on criminal charges. They also detained at least a dozen others. The opposition leader is charged with inciting violence at a 2019 anti-government demonstration when protesters stormed Parliament. He faces 9 years in prison if convicted. The political tension in that country started last October when the Georgian Dream Coalition won the election. But opposition groups claimed the voting was rigged and refused to take their seats in Parliament. Last week, the Georgian prime minister resigned, citing the plan to arrest the opposition leader as his reason. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is preparing to sanction Russia for the SolarWinds hack and the near-fatal poisoning of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. The massive cybersecurity breach affected more than 9 government agencies and roughly 100 different companies. The president of Microsoft told senators at a hearing yesterday that its researchers believed at least 1,000 very skilled, very capable engineers worked on the breach. Joining us now, member of the Armed Services Intelligence and Rules Committees, Independent Senator Angus King of Maine. Great to have you.
Senator King, I've got to say the line that Mika just talked about was the most concerning in what came out yesterday, and that is the fact that the head of Microsoft said that this looked like a generational effort, part of a generational effort, and that at least 1,000 very skilled engineers appear to have been working on this hack. This is obviously Russia's one of Russia's main means of warfare moving forward. How are we going to defend ourselves?
Well, this is the most serious external threat that this country faces is cyber. Ironically, you just had Mike Gallagher on. Mike and I were the co-chairs of something called the National Cyberspace Solarium Commission for the past 2 years, working on this very issue and helping the country to develop a cyber policy, because SolarWinds is just the latest example of us being attacked in a systematic, comprehensive way. The good news about SolarWinds is it appears it was an espionage attack, that is, gaining information. It wasn't what they call an active measures or disruptive attack, but it could have been, and that was part of the testimony that we had yesterday. We saw in Texas what happens when the electric grid goes down, and we know that hackers have the capacity to do that. The Russians did it in Ukraine about 3 or 4 years ago. So this is a chilling example of how serious this threat is to the country.
So in the Department of State, Homeland Security, Treasury, and Defense were all breached. Obviously, that's chilling as well. What are we doing to make sure that never happens again?
Well, in the National Defense Bill that passed in December, there were 25 or 26 different provisions from our commission that are now in law, the most important of which was the creation of a national cyber director. One of the problems is cyber is scattered all over. The responsibility for cyber and cyber defense is scattered all over the federal government and resides principally in the private sector. 85% of the target space for a cyber attack is in the private sector. So we created this Office of National Cyber Director, appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate. That's now in the law. The White House is working on setting that office up right now. We've also got to work with our allies, make this an international effort. But there was an announcement yesterday that was very important, Joe, and that was the White House is preparing to punish Russia for this attack. And that's been the missing piece in all of this, is a deterrent. One of the witnesses at our hearing yesterday said, you know, they'll always find another way in. He said, we're like a goalie taking shots from Wayne Gretzky, and eventually the puck's going to get in the net. And so defense isn't the only answer. It's part of the answer. But we have to demonstrate to our adversaries that if they come at us like this, there's going to be a cost imposed. They have to have a calculus that says, well, I don't know, this could be a real problem. And the White House's announcement yesterday was very important to send a message that there are lines that you can't cross in this area, and if you do, you're going to pay the price.
Well, and that's, of course, talking about sanctions. What about our own cyber warfare? If they go after, let's say they go after our grid, our power grid, do the Russians understand that we not only have the capability, but we have the will to cause much more damage to them?
Well, the key term you just used was, do they understand? And a deterrent doesn't work unless your adversary knows you have the capacity and the willingness to use it. Remember, Dr. Strangelove, why didn't you tell us, Dmitry, about the doomsday machine? Well, the premier likes surprises. A deterrent isn't a deterrent unless it's public. There has to be a declaratory policy. And I'm hoping that the steps yesterday are the beginning of the establishment of that. Because if you think back to most of the attacks that we've had, Sony's, OPM, the 2016 election, there wasn't much in the way of response. That has to change in order. The best cyber attack is the one that doesn't occur. But if all we do is trying to patch and defend ourselves, they're going to keep coming at us. So that's why I'm hoping that what happened yesterday is an indication that this administration is going to take this seriously and establish the principle that if you come after the United States in cyber, you will pay the price. Now, it's also got to be international, Joe. International sanctions are much more effective than just unilateral one country. If somebody's indicted in Russia, I want it so that they can't visit Monte Carlo or London as well as Miami or New York. The sanctions, if they are worldwide and we develop worldwide a kind of Geneva Convention of cyber, I think that will also help to bring this very dangerous instrumentality under control.
Senator King, you participated in the hearing that we've been listening to quite a bit this morning, the testimony from the heads of law enforcement organizations that tried and failed in many ways to protect the Capitol on January 6th. What new information did you hear and what troubled you the most?
Well, first I have to say yesterday was a record for me. All four of the committees that I'm on had hearings, three of them at exactly the same time. So I was bouncing back and forth electronically between three hearings at one time. In terms of the attack on the Capitol, clearly we still need additional information. It sort of reminds you of September 11th, an intelligence failure. Not necessarily an intelligence failure. There was intelligence about how dangerous it was. It didn't seem to get to the right people. And again, you get back to the silo problem. You also get back to the question of who's in charge. I think John Ossoff asked that question yesterday. Who's in charge? And the answer isn't exactly clear. Is it the sergeant at arms of the two houses? Is it the chief of the Capitol Police? There's some kind of board, but it clearly didn't work. So I think that's a concern. The other thing that concerned me, frankly, was Ron Johnson talking about provocateurs and fake Trump supporters. It reminded me, I was listening to that very part of it and reminded me of the old country song, who are you going to believe, me or your own lion eyes? I mean, we all saw who was at that rally turned into a riot. All the people there obviously weren't violent and weren't interested in violence, but that doesn't mean that the people who led it weren't there because they'd been brought there by their president and told this is how what you have to do to stop the transfer of power.
So, Senator, one of the questions we've been asking this morning is about this 4.5-hour gap we learned about in detail yesterday from the time the request was made for the National Guard put into the Pentagon to the time they arrived. Frankly, they arrived when it was over. They helped to secure it afterward, but the worst of the attack was over. What's your understanding from the testimony you've heard and intelligence you may have gathered over the last month and a half about why that delay was so long and why the National Guard wasn't there sooner?
Well, first, it's still unclear yesterday as to actually when that request was made. And you have to understand that the National Guard doesn't come in by themselves necessarily. And they were asked not to come to the Capitol, at least that's my understanding, a day or two before because of concern about having troops surrounding the Capitol. Ironically, the very visuals that we're now seeing with this huge fence and troops every 20 feet. But there are going to be 2 more hearings in this series, and I believe that the next one will focus on that very question. Why did it take so long? One of the suggestions I made in my questioning yesterday is there ought to be a contingency plan on the shelf of exactly how this kind of thing can work. And I think one of the problems yesterday, or one of the problems in the reaction, was a failure of imagination, a failure to imagine what could happen. And there should have been a sort of automatic, here's who you call, here's what the time frame is, here's how it comes down. And we're going to have questions about that as we go forward. So far, I haven't seen any evidence that there was interference from the White House to slow down the National Guard or anything like that. But we're going to ask those questions. I sincerely doubt that that's the case, and it does take time to deploy. But you're right; that was one of the gaps. The real question is, why didn't the Capitol Police understand the nature of the threat? There was this very serious threat from the Norfolk FBI office that just apparently didn't get to the leadership of the Capitol Police.
Yeah, that came in the night before. Senator Mike Barnicle's here with a question for you, Mike.
Senator, as you know, there has been a proposal to establish, in the wake of January 6th, a supposed commission like the 9/11 Commission. And it's supposedly going to be a bipartisan commission to probe into the questions that you were just talking about. But in this day and age, do you think it's possible to have a bipartisan commission?
That's a really good question. I thought Peter outlined it very well earlier on the program. If it's not a bipartisan commission of people who are widely respected on all sides, it's not going to work. The whole idea is to produce a report that the American people can say, okay, here's what happened. Here are the facts. This is a difficult situation. September 11th, there was a little bit of, whose fault was it in George W. Bush, but it didn't have the partisan overtones that this situation does. Because if you're going to have a commission looking into what happened, one of the things you're going to have to look into is what was the responsibility of the President of the United States. And would this have happened but for his actions in the months preceding and in the morning of the event? That obviously, by definition, is a very partisan issue. So the question you ask is a good one. I think a better result might be if Congress could act in a bipartisan way to try to get to the bottom of it. Yesterday wasn't a terribly encouraging start, but I'm not sure a commission appointed by Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Mr. McCarthy is going to necessarily have the nonpartisan chops that you want in order to get a convincing answer, if you will.
Senator Angus King, thank you very much for being on this morning. It's great to see you.